It's 1865. You stand at the edge of a vast, empty shoreline. The warm Gulf breeze blows against your face, the salty air mingling with the distant smell of pine and marsh. The sound of the waves is consistent, rolling in and out, echoing against the vast openness. To your left, a small group of ships drifts just offshore, their sails catching the last light of the setting sun. On land, exhausted French settlers stumble ashore, dragging crates and barrels through the soft, shifting sand of what we now know as Matagorda Bay on the Texas coast. They think that they've arrived at the mouth of the Mississippi River, the gateway to a French empire in North America. But in reality, they are hundreds of miles off course. This mistake will end up costing them everything. This is the story of LaSalle's ill-fated colony, a grand dream of French expansion that ended in disaster and death on the wild Texas coast. I'm Matt Pierce. I'm a journalist, and this is Faces of Time, Texas. Stories about our past, our present, and our future, and how it all comes together. I believe that everything is connected to our past, and we're all moving forward. There's lessons to be learned from the past, and visions to carry into the future. The story of LaSalle begins with a man whose dreams were as vast as the North American continent itself. René-Robert Cavelier, Sieur de La Salle, born in France in 1643. LaSalle was not your typical explorer at all. He wasn't motivated by adventure alone. He wanted to build something long, something lasting. His vision of the great French Empire that stretched across the heart of North America from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. The key to this empire, LaSalle believed, sat along the Mississippi River. Now, LaSalle had already proven himself as a very capable explorer. In the 1680s, he journeyed from the Great Lakes down the entire length of the Mississippi River, and that claimed the vast Mississippi Basin for France, naming it La Louisiane, after King Louis XIV. But LaSalle wasn't satisfied with just discovery. LaSalle wanted to colonize this new land, to turn it into a thriving outpost of French power that could compete with the growing English and Spanish colonies here in North America. LaSalle's vision was bold. He planned to establish a French settlement at the mouth of the Mississippi River, securing control of this vital waterway, creating a hub for trade and military defense. With French outposts stretching from the Gulf Coast to Canada, he believed France could dominate the entire continent. In 1684, after securing approval and funding from King Louis XIV, LaSalle set sail from France with a fleet of 4 ships and around 300 colonists, soldiers, and missionaries. Their destination? The Mississippi River, where they would build a colony. This colony would stand as a bulwark against the Spanish to the west and the English in the east. But things didn't go as planned. From the very start, the expedition was plagued with problems. LaSalle's fleet, led by the warship La Jolie, was ill-prepared for the long and dangerous journey across the Atlantic. The ships were overcrowded with supplies and people. This made life difficult on board the ships. It was also very uncomfortable. Disease quickly spread among the passengers, and many fell ill before they even reached this new world. Relations between LaSalle and the captains of his ships were strained, particularly with the commander of the fleet, Captain Beaujeu. Beaujeu openly questioned LaSalle's leadership and his navigational skills. Worse yet, the expedition ran into serious trouble when it reached the Caribbean. One of the ships, the unravel, was captured by Spanish pirates near the island of Santo Domingo. This robbed the expedition of valuable supplies, leaving LaSalle with just 3 ships. As if it weren't enough, storms battered the fleet as they made their way towards the Gulf of Mexico, further slowing their progress. But the worst mistake was yet to come. LaSalle believed that he could find the mouth of the Mississippi River on his own, relying on old maps and his intuition. But these maps were incomplete and inaccurate at best. LaSalle missed the Mississippi River entirely. Instead, his fleet ended up hundreds of miles west along the coast of what we now know as Texas. By the time they reached Matagorda Bay in early 1685, LaSalle was convinced that he had found his destination. In reality, they had landed on the barren, mosquito-ridden shores of the Texas Gulf Coast, far from any major river or fertile land. Despite their miscalculations, LaSalle was determined to press on. After unloading their supplies onto the beaches there at Matagorda, LaSalle ordered his men to begin construction on a settlement. They called it Fort St. Louis. This small makeshift colony would be the heart of LaSalle's doomed dream. The colonists, men, women, and children, worked under the blazing Texas sun to build wooden huts and storehouses. They constructed a small fort on a low rise near the water using whatever materials they could find. But the land was hostile. There were few resources. The soil was poor and fresh water was scarce. The settlers struggled to find enough food, and their hunting efforts yielded very little. The fish and oysters they gathered from the bay provided some relief, but it wasn't enough to sustain a growing colony at all. In the background loomed the heart of disease. Sickness continued to ravage the settlers. This weakened their bodies and their morale. The heat, the mosquitoes, the unforgiving landscape made everyday life a test of endurance. But then again, as if this wasn't enough, LaSalle had also lost one of his most important things, l'unravel, the ship. It was carrying most of the colony's provisions and it had run aground on a sandbar while trying to navigate the shallow waters of Matagorda Bay. As the ship broke apart, many of their supplies were lost at sea. Without the food and tools that they'd counted on, the settlers' prospects grew even more desperate. LaSalle realized that their only hope was to find the Mississippi River. If they could locate the river, they could establish contact with French outposts further north. They could secure fresh supplies. This could potentially save the colony. But first, they had to survive the immediate dangers around them. As the months went on, life at Fort St. Louis became increasingly bleak. The colonists, far from home and far from the mouth of the Mississippi River, found themselves isolated in an unforgiving wilderness. Their relationships with the local Karankawa tribes, the indigenous people of the Texas coast, were tense at best. Initially, the Karankawa kept their distance from the French, observing these strange newcomers from afar. But as the French settlers grew more desperate, the relations soured. The Karankawa were hunter-gatherers. They moved between coastal inland areas depending on the season. They'd lived in harmony with this harsh environment for centuries, but to French settlers, the Karankawas seemed wild and threatening. Misunderstandings led to conflict, and pretty soon, violence broke out. The Karankawans raided the settlement, and in return, LaSalle's men retaliated. This further strained the relationship. The French were now not only fighting the land, but they were also defending their lives from attack. Inside Fort St. Louis, conditions were deteriorating quickly. Hunger gnawed at the settlers and disease continued to spread. LaSalle, the ever-stubborn leader, refused to give up. He organized several expeditions into the surrounding wilderness. He was determined to find the elusive Mississippi River. Each expedition was grueling, with men trudging through thick forest, swamps, and marshlands. Their efforts were in vain. They never found the river. Meanwhile, supplies ran dangerously low. Settlers began to die. Starvation claimed some, disease claimed others. The once hopeful colony was turned into a ghost town. By the winter of 1686, fewer than 50 colonists remained at Fort St. Louis. LaSalle's dream of building a French empire in the New World was slipping away. It was slipping away quickly. In January of 1687, LaSalle made one last desperate decision. He gathered 17 of his remaining men and set out on one final expedition to find help. They would march north, he said, in search of French settlements along the Mississippi River or in the Great Lakes region. If they could reach these outposts, perhaps they could send aid back to the survivors at Fort St. Louis. But this journey was marked by death. For weeks, LaSalle and his men trekked through the rugged terrain of Texas, facing hunger, illness, and exhaustion. Tensions among the men grew as the hardships mounted. Soon dissent turned to outright rebellion. In March of 1687, somewhere near present-day Navasota, Texas, LaSalle's journey came to a sudden and brutal end. Two of his men, frustrated by LaSalle's leadership, despairing over their chances of survival, they turned on him. They shot LaSalle in the head and left his body to rot in the Texas sun in the wilderness. The man who'd once dreamed of great French empires now lay dead in the empty, wild land that he sought forever to conquer. Of the 17 men who set out with LaSalle, only a handful survived to reach French outposts. Their tale of betrayal and death spread quickly, sealing LaSalle's legacy as both a visionary and a tragic figure in the histories of time in North American exploration. With LaSalle dead, Fort St. Louis was left to its own fate. The settlers who remained behind faced increasing rage from the Caracalla. One by one, they were killed or captured. The fort, once a symbol of French ambition, was now little more than a haunted ruin. By 1688, the Caracalla launched a final attack on Fort St. Louis, killing nearly all the remaining settlers. A few survivors, mostly women and children, were taken captive by the Caracalla, and they lived among them for years before being rescued by Spanish forces. When Spanish soldiers arrived at the site of Fort St. Louis in 1689, they found only remnants of the colony. Collapsed huts, rusted weapons, and a few scattered bones. The French dream of the colonizing Texas was over. LaSalle's legacy of the expedition had failed spectacularly, but its consequences would be far-reaching. His ill-fated colony at Fort St. Louis might have been a disaster for France, but it sparked a renewal of interest in Texas from another power, Spain. Alarmed by the presence of a French settlement so close to the northern territories, the French redoubled their efforts to solidify their control over Texas, establishing missions and presidios, forts, throughout the region to ensure that no other European power would challenge their dominance. In a strange way, LaSalle's failure set the future stage for Texas, paving the way for Spanish colonization of the area, and eventually the blending of European and native cultures that would define our region's identity. Today, the story of LaSalle's doomed colony has largely been forgotten by most, overshadowed by other tales of Texas history. But the ruins of Fort St. Louis, now buried under layers of soil and time, still whisper a moment when French ambition collided with the harsh realities of this new world. It's a story of dreams undone by distance, by nature, and the unpredictability of human ambition. As we stand on the shores of Matagorda Bay, we can still feel the ghost of LaSalle and his settlers, their presence woven into the very landscape that they sought to conquer. The waves that lap against the shore echo the fading hopes of the lost colony, while the winds carry their story, half forgotten, but never completely erased from history. I'm Matt Pierce. I'm a journalist, I'm a historian, and I'm a content creator. I'm a native Texan. This is the Faces of Time, Texas podcast. Thank you for joining me.